Dear all, good evening, good morning, good afternoon to one and all present here. And we are so happy to have all of you and with our two amazing speakers from Germany and from Afghanistan at the special occasion of the UN Social Forum, where Quality Link International takes pride in hosting the side event on the importance of global governance and good crisis management in times of crisis, and especially in the focus under the focus of COVID-19. We have seen during the situation of COVID that there has been so many life losses. Beyond life losses, there has been so many malfunctions in the management of governance, in the situation of economic development, and much more. But how are we going to cope up with it, or how have countries and states and individuals and organizations and associations coped up with it already in the past, or are doing so in the present? This social forum, the theme of the social forum, where we have been discussing more about the good practices and the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic itself, how we have managed to become better as humanity in handling such crises, has been very, very efficient in engaging a global discussion towards a better future. And this event, Quality Link, takes pride in sharing, in bringing to you some knowledge, some perspectives, and some guidance and some thoughts from two experts from two different regions in the world, where we're going to engage in a very fruitful discussion. So please allow me to introduce Mr. Joseph Kanders as our first speaker, who is going to discuss with you about good practices, the strategies, and how crisis management works in Germany and how it has affected the world. So he has been working with the military, he's been working with the Federal Affairs for Crisis Management in Germany, but here today he is on his personal capacity to talk to us and to share his experiences on his personal capacity with us. We're so thankful to have him, and Mr. Kanders, please, the floor is yours.
So hello to everyone here from Germany, and thank you very, very much for introducing me and giving me here the chance to speak to all of you and to give you some ideas of what I have learned during the years about crisis management and how we want to deal with it here in Germany. I say it this way because there are some points I will show you in this brief overview. I will give you why I told you we want to. Just because we have plans for everything does not mean we do it every time this way. Thank you very much again. And because it's a very short time I have for a very big topic, I want to go through the presentation now with you together. And could you go please to the next one? At first, I will introduce myself very briefly. Then I want to show you some points of the German security system, or how we say the architecture of security here. And then I will bring in some thoughts about the crisis management during Corona and how our system worked or did not work. And at last point, I want to give you some general ideas of crisis management, nevertheless, what crisis it belongs to. So we can go to the next page. Just some very short words to me because you introduced me already. And actually, I'm working as a desk officer for the German Federal Agency for Civil Protection and Disaster Assistance. I'm working there as a lecturer in the Division for National Crisis Management. And my students, if you want to say so, are from all German agencies and governmental organizations, also not governmental organizations, mostly crisis management teams of cities, of ministries, and we want to bring a system to Germany that is in all states common. So this is a really big task. I will say some words to this in the further presentation. As well, I'm captain in the German Air Force. I am being captain in reserve, but in active duty position. So it's combined, these two jobs, because in the German Air Force, I'm liaison officer for civil-military cooperation. We have it in for the Bundeswehr, how we call our army, in the nations where we are with our army, but we have it as well in Germany, the civil-military cooperation system, because of some very special legal issues we have here in Germany. I was working the last 10 years before changing to the federal agency for a district government in Germany, and was working there on the Department for Public Safety. And I'm also involved in politics here, but just in regional politics. So I think I can give you a bright overview over the system in Germany out of very different perspectives. Okay, we can go to the next one. Our security system in Germany is standing on 5 points, as you want to say like this. We have the law enforcement agencies. I was thinking a lot how to call this there, because you have to understand we have in Germany not only one police, we have 17 polices. Because Germany is a federal state and is belonging out of federal states, and every federal state of the 16 states has an own police. And we also have a federal police, which is more like the border police. So there are at least 17 police authorities working together in Germany. We have the so-called Bundeswehr, the German military. We have the intelligence agencies, and I will go one further, the private sector with the critical infrastructure, like power plants, water, and all this. And we have the stakeholders in the civil protection, and this is the point I want to have a closer view with you. Okay. The German system divides into civil defense and disaster management. There are two different systems standing next to each other. The civil defense or civil protection in state of defense is just in case of defense activated. And in this case, the federation will have the leading. But in all other cases of crisis management, the different states are leading the management. And both the federation and the states as well have their own organizations for this. But in case of a disaster, like some fire in the woods or whatever, the federation can help the states with its organizations for defense. So we have, for example, the federal police, like the border police, which can help the states. We have the so-called Technisches Hilfswerk. It's a very special German thing in Europe, because it's like firefighters, but with no fire. So they are just solving the technical problems and issues. And we just have had a really bad flood in Germany, and they could, for example, rebuild bridges in some weeks. And we have the Bundeswehr as the army. Okay. So how does the system work together? It's divided into different responsibilities. In Germany, it's not top down, it's exactly the other way around. If there is any disaster happening, the first responsible authorities are the local authorities. So for a normal fire, for example, there are the cities responsible, and for some bigger events, there are the districts responsible, so that not even the states are leading. The federal states are just making the laws and have the supervision of this. And the federation is just there in case of defense in war. Okay. Now I told about some issues with German military. Out of our history, our so-called Grundgesetz, the constitution, gives the army not so many rights to work in the land. They are just for foreign affairs, but they can help the authorities in Germany, but they have no responsibility in Germany. And if they are not asked by a state or by a regional governor, they cannot do anything. Our constitution allows them only to do technical assistance, and in cases of natural disasters or some serious incidents, they can also give administrative assistance. As well as everyone in Germany, in urgent cases, they have to give emergency aid, sure. And there are some special things like public relations or training of the troops. But you have to have in mind that the German military has no responsibility inside Germany, just if they are asked for help. Okay. Next, please. So some thoughts. One back, please.
Sorry. Okay, we're just here.
Okay, some thoughts out of this system where everything is managed local and it's just growing up. If the situation is getting bigger and bigger, then it can grow up to the state level, but normally never to the federation level. There are different advantages, like in COVID. You can react very close to the place where it is. And you can also react with different laws, because every of the 16 states in Germany has made their own laws for managing COVID. This can be an advantage, but it also was a big disadvantage, in my opinion, because it was confusing the citizens. We have states in Germany, but if you travel along, you won't see any borders. And if you cross the state borders, there are different laws. And in the one state, you are allowed to meet with 2 people, in the next state with 5, and so on and so on. And this was really, really confusing. So that the state governors or the presidents of the states had a meeting every 2 weeks and tried to find a solution, a common solution. But as long as everyone has his own political issues, they went out of this meeting. And after one day, we already had 5 or 6 different solutions here. One other thing is the military support. I already told you, German military out of our history is not wanted to work in Germany, except they are asked for by civilians. And the last point, which is a thing that was a big advantage in the international cooperation as well as in European cooperation. In Germany, we have the so-called GMLZ. It is a joint reporting and situation center, and you can imagine it as a single point of contact for help. So if one of our states, for example, in the East Germany, they needed medical supplies, they did not have to ask all other 15 states, wait for their answers and check every 15 answers and make contracts with the other states. They just asked this single point of contact, and this single point of contact spread it, got back the information and gave this information back to the state which needed help. And the same system we have in Europe with the ERCC. There is one single point of contact to ask for help, so that communication will go on much faster than asking every single state. For example, we had such a request from an South Asian state for face masks during COVID, and it just went to the ERCC. The ERCC spread it to the single point of contact in all the European nations. And at this time, I, for example, was working at the GMLZ. And there we asked our 16 German states. Then 2 or 3 states said, okay, we can help. And we gave this response to the European Center for Coordination. And they could offer this to the state in South Asia who asked for help. So it will make it more fast. Okay, so the next, please. This may be very confusing, but I will just rush through it. It's just showing how an office in Germany will work. There is any problem which gets in, then the authority management will give it to the head of department, to the division chief, and so on. So at least this problem will be solved by some official in charge. This is the expert. It's not the leading one. It's the most buttoned down person, but it's the person who has the most expertise to solve this problem. And this person will give it up during the steps again. They will all sign it to say, okay, we want to do it like this, or we don't want to do it like this. It's a quite good system because you will get the most experience and expectation out of it, but it will take some time. So it's not usable for emergencies. So the next, please. And in emergencies, this page may be even more confusing now. We put in a so-called crisis management team, which is a leading team of the authority and which should give the problem directly without all the other steps to the official in charge. There, this official in charge will present 1, 2, 3 solutions. One is wrong. Why one is wrong? Because if I give my boss one possible solution, then my boss will not be able to decide. He can just say yes or no. So at least I should give him 2 or 3 different solutions, but also tell him about the prices of the solutions, also political prices or whatever problems may be in there. But then the crisis management team really can make a decision. They will make the decision and give the problem back to the expert level where it has to be done. So our idea is there is not one mighty person making all decisions one after the other. There is a management teams led by a responsible person, yes, maybe a mighty responsible person. But this management team is just decision making, not working on expert level. They still ask the experts how to solve problems. Okay, next, please. Maybe some of you will know this. Okay, I've translated it because it was a German thing, but it's also used in NATO, for example. It's a decision-making process. You first have to get a really clear picture of what's going on. So one of the most important points is inspection and monitoring. If you don't have a clear picture, you cannot make a valid decision. From this yellow step, you go on in the evaluation. I will tell a little bit more on the next page, and then I will finish. But if you have a clear picture, then you can make your evaluation and find out of this evaluation some solution what to do. And normally you should see at least 2 or 3 different solutions. So you can see what advantages and disadvantages you have. And then you can decide. You even can decide politically, but you can decide. Then you give your orders, which lead to the operations. And while operations are going on, you again have to begin monitoring. Was it the right decision? Is it working like I thought? Or is it not working? Is it making situation even worse or better? And then you have to do a new inspection of the situation. And so this is called in Germany or in NATO the leading circle. So next, please. I will just rush through this because what I'm saying here is recorded, so you can see it later again. I just wanted to show you with this that every single step in this circle is not just a word. There is something behind it, and there are several steps behind it. Here, I just want to show you the three things in the middle, very on top. If you have your situation and you have seen your situation, you don't just have to see, I will make it an example, a very simple example, a house is burning. So what's the situation? The house is burning. What's my own competence? I'm firefighting authority. Okay, it's my duty to do something. And then you go to the next three steps. You have to see what's the general conditions. Most see this, but most forget the next step. What is with third parties involved? And what problems do they have? Can they help me? Do they need help? Can they make the situation more complex? And the third point, for example, here, every time should be, what's my own position? Do I have one car for the fire, 2, 10, 20, whatever? And you need all the situation to make your decision. I will close now because I already took 3 minutes more than I planned to. It was a really, really brief overview, but I hope I could give you at least some little ideas what's our plan of managing crisis situations here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kanders. It is really amazing to see how many process even an emergency decision making has to go through to react. And it is of great respect to all the work people in the frontline work like you and many in the world do. And but we are now moving to our next speaker, Ms. Farkunda Zara Naderi, who is from Afghanistan. She was the former advisor of UN affairs to the former president, Mr. Ashraf Ghani, and she has been she's been a famous politician. She still works very efficiently in the local movements to promote women's rights. She was a former member of parliament, and I can say much more about her. But why we are here listening to two extreme speakers before I invite her to speak is to notice that there is such a difference in the world that we are living at. We have countries and states where such efficient bureaucratic capacity building mechanisms which exist, whereas in the other parts of the world where crisis and turmoil has been burning and has been very upsetting. So we invite Ms. Naderi with much honor to ask her thoughts on global cooperation, the importance of crisis management and good governance. Ms. Naderi, the floor is yours. You're muted, Ms. Naderi.
Thank you, Shruti. Hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to be in this wonderful panel talking about a very relevant subject, mainly to the country that I belong to. Yes, we are all connected to each other. And as the time passes, we can even see that, in one panel, one participant can be in Tashkent and another one can be in Germany, and the other one can be in different parts of the world. But at the same time, our realities can be so different. And also, our definition of crisis can have different impact in our minds. So today I'm talking about Afghanistan in a panel that is so different for me, the way I've been talking about Afghanistan in the past. Because I'm thinking I'm talking about a country that I know so much, but yet I don't know its current situation. Certainly I'll talk about the importance of crisis management and the global cooperation in the situation or the crisis that Afghanistan are facing. Our previous speaker talked about the crisis management in an advanced country like Germany. I think today's world, we are all, we have been subject to a big threat such as COVID for, I think, 2 years now. But I've been talking to someone before coming to this event in Afghanistan who is a doctor, because I just wanted to know how the COVID is going in the country. He told me there's no more recognition of COVID in Afghanistan. So people are no longer given the attention in regard to COVID in a country where, because at the end of the day, we are talking about good governance, where the good governance are not present there. And the crises are like very high, that we have got a very increasing level of humanitarian crisis in terms of internally displaced people in the country. COVID on the other hand, and then a famine is attacking people from the other side. And we have got multiple crises, basically, from economic crisis to social to humanitarian. So it is really important that you have to have a system to ensure that you can manage the whole crisis that you're facing. Like we have been talking about COVID crisis, that, a phenomena that comes and hits everyone, and the countries are feeling how to really manage that crisis. But in Afghanistan, actually, since there is no particular system, even though there is a new constitution is set to be taking the country out of being lawless, which is the 1964 constitution, which is the Kingdom Constitution. And it was announced through a Facebook, of Ministry of Justice, where there's so much ambiguity. But at the same time, we have a different ministries in Afghanistan, including Ministry of Health in regard to COVID. But these ministries cannot function so far as institutions, because you need professional people in order that you can know how to run the system. But in Afghanistan, because so many people were full of fear, and women couldn't attend, young girls to schools, over 7 grades, as well as university. They can't go to university and to work. So this itself paralyzes the institutions. On the other hand, we know that when you have so much fear that even men, they cannot easily go to work because they're worried if their previous relation with different politicians or different governmental people are subject to investigation, then they don't feel secure enough that they can go and help others, because they think they need help within the country. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that from good governance, which needs transparency, which needs inclusivity, which needs to embrace different forms of the society in order to make a transparent system to be called a legitimate government. As you know, that in Afghanistan so far, no one recognized the government as a legitimate government or a state. So we are failing on that part. But on the other hand, we need the global cooperation in regard to humanitarian crises as well as COVID, and all the other issues from economic to social connectivity that we have with the world, that Afghanistan needs to function as a proper country the way other states are functioning. So here, you know that there's so many evacuation of people from Afghanistan going to different parts of the world as refugees. And at the first, it happened in a very disastrous manner, because all of a sudden the system collapsed and the regime collapsed, and international as well as national citizens inside the country had to evacuate. And I believe that everyone's seen the news about the way people were evacuated from Afghanistan, and even many people got killed at the airport, leave alone the people who were killed in different parts of the country. So there is like so many need for humanitarian aid at the same time for the people who are suffering from famine, and the food prices generally increase, and especially for food, the prices are so high that people cannot afford to buy it. The many people selling, I heard from someone that I was talking to today over the phone, that some people selling their furnitures and people home items for two main reasons. One, to leave the country and go somewhere else and take refuge, or to sell it in order to be able to feed themselves, because obviously there is no job, there is no salary coming to people, and the banks are frozen, and so people don't have any income, and the savings that they had in the bank, they don't have access to use it and purchase. But what they have at home is their furniture that they have to sell. But of course, they have to sell them in a very low price while they are getting the food and consuming items in a very high prices. So this is one of the field that the humanitarian aid definitely needed in Afghanistan, but it needs to be coming in a very systematic manner, that it can have transparency to be ensured that it's going to the right group of people. Because sometimes I see that different countries are still sending, trucks of humanitarian aid in Afghanistan, but I cannot see any transparency whether these foods or any kind of humanitarian aids are provided to the right people. Because you can see, when you look at pictures or any news from Afghanistan, people are on the street and women are wearing chadari or burqa, sitting on the street to sell, while you didn't have that as a view in Afghanistan before. So that is another problematic point, going back to the system. If there is going to be a system that we are going to have the international personnel through UN, because UN agencies right now in Afghanistan are not properly functioning. It's the UNAMA that is working, and it's mainly for political purposes. So if they will come, if the humanitarian aid comes to Afghanistan, we need the international personnel to get into the country, but also to use at the same time the national professional people, or maybe professional in different fields, that their knowledge can be used in the distribution of food, that they can get a job, do something useful, but at the same time, people can be giving the aid to ensure that the aid is not wasted, or it is not subject to any kind of corruption. Because if there's no system and transparency, then it's so difficult to define even a good governance in terms of a system to come and set up the rest of the system within the country. So basically, all our system collapsed the way our regime collapsed, and any names like a cabinet group seems more as a fantasy rather than being able to provide services to the public. So when we need the international cooperation in aid, we just don't need just the injection of the aid inside the country, but to ensure that we have the right route, that the aid is going to the right people who are in need of that food. So that's why I personally believe that good governance is very much needed in regard to crisis management and in regard to its success, to ensure that any kind of crisis, including COVID, or it's famine, or it's like security threats, not only through COVID that kills people, but in Afghanistan we have even still suicide attacks in different parts of the country. We had one suicide attack in one of the mosques in Kabul. The other one, we had it in a mosque in another province called Kanders, and the other one was in Host in a madrasa, or in a somewhere that people were learning. So having said that, this is so important to ensure that if you don't have good governance, you cannot even provide security for public. Because one of the view that globally existed, that if Taliban comes, they will provide security in terms of the fact that there's not going to be any more suicide attacker, there's not going to be any more people to be killed. But even today we see that Taliban are inside Kabul, and their main forces are, and the main figures are inside Kabul. But even in Kabul, it happens that there is suicide attack, and we are worried that if it will increase, it will take the country into a civil war, not only to civil war, where many people and many groups are not only satisfied but very frustrated about the situation that is building in the country, but also a conflict where there's going to be different terrorist groups trying to compete over the power. So this is not only threatening to Afghanistan's well-being, it's a threatening for the well-being of our neighbors, for the region, and to the world. So I hope that there's going to be a global cooperation with Afghanistan at this stage, because I know Afghanistan now is forgotten. It's no longer an interested topic to the world. But let's see, it's not going to be like the way COVID started from one country and the other country thought it's not as dangerous as it can be to them. But now it's a global threat, and it's been devastating everyone's life for many years. So I hope that we are going to have global cooperation for humanitarian aids that Afghanistan needs. And I hope that Afghanistan is not going to lose its 20 years values, where its diversity, its inclusivity, and women's rights, which is one of the important topics, and especially in global cooperation and crisis management, women can be the core of that topics, because women would suffer, first of all, more than anyone, especially in a country like Afghanistan, because women are not allowed to work. I'm so sorry, because I think it is not like enough. Women are not having their rights, so they are affected more than anyone else. So in the global cooperation of the world into Afghanistan, I think women should be taking the core of the attention, and they are the most vulnerable groups with the other minority groups. So I will stop here, and I leave the rest to any kind of question, if there is any. I'll be willing to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Naderi. It is, in fact, a very, very disheartening situation, especially after what we witnessed. And there was a rampage of coverage for 1 week on media, and everybody was talking about Afghanistan for a week, and then now nobody does. Then there came so many more issues, so many more topics that world is keeping on moving, but we really need to highlight this issue, that there needs to be more global cooperation, there needs to be more assistance for the sake of humanity, for the sake of protecting human rights, and especially during such a difficult crisis. So please excuse me. So we will now open the floor for question and answers. If there are any questions, please raise your hand, or you can leave your questions in the chat. After that, we will close the session. So please raise your hands if you have any questions, so we can move into the question and answer sessions. Are there any questions for our speakers? Okay, so I have a question which has been received by many, and this is a question which is open to both of you, Mr. Kanders and Ms. Naderi. So we have been, as both of you just explained, the different situations in both Afghanistan and in Germany, and these are the situations not just, I mean, these are not just the differences of two countries. There are differences. There are so many African countries. There are so many countries in the developing countries, in the southern world, as they call it, that there has been a very depriving state in terms of security, in terms of managing crisis. So how do you think this global partnership mechanism can work more? There are more mechanisms, like how just Mr. Kanders mentioned about the emergency response coordinating center and how the countries can ask for support. But how do you think they can work more efficiently, especially given the case of situations such as Afghanistan, where there is no stable governance in the first place? So Mr. Kanders, would you like to answer first?
At least I can try, because it's a very complex question you gave to us. I'm seeing it from different perspectives. I think one important point is this single point of contact I mentioned before. And also not just a national point of contact, also something like a supranational point of contact. The European Union has something like this, but I think it would be great if these contact points could work worldwide together, and if there are more supranational contact points. But I see some other problem in this out of politics and also out of security reasons, because and I'm speaking here, I have to tell it again, as a private person now, not speaking for the German government. Even with Afghanistan, we have in Germany now a very complex problem. We've been many years in Afghanistan with civil and military cooperation, with our military, with non-governmental organizations, and even some comrades of myself were there to help assisting building schools, especially for girls and these things. How to get help there in a situation where my government does have no chances to make any contracts with the de facto government of the Taliban at the moment, because it's a very suspicious government for us, and we have political problems. And most countries in the world which need help and assistance have, well, some problems in their governments, like extremists or dictatorships or these things. How to deal with this situation, I think, is even a bigger problem, because the people need the help, and they should get the help. But how to do it without assisting a terror regime, for example? And this is a question I cannot answer, I'm sorry.
Yes, perfectly makes sense. This is a situation, unfortunately, in the case of multiple multiple civil conflicts. So, Ms. Naderi, your viewpoints.
Yes, I understand that it's a very complicated question, in a sense that, you know, it needs the right answer in order that it can be implemented. We have got multiple layers of crisis in Afghanistan. I cannot call it any longer problems, you know, from security to hunger, from deprivation of women's rights, and not only women, but, you know, citizenship rights. We are like, you know, the best word is the collapse of a regime. And I don't think that also a regime, the collapse of a state. So in that kind of situation, there are multiple demands for all of that. But yes, it's important that we have to really focus on humanitarian aid, because it's important that we have to keep Afghans alive in order that they can demand their other rights. Because if we care about human rights, first of all, you know, we have to ensure that they are alive, that we are going to talk about their other rights. But it doesn't mean that if they will be alive, then they are going to be dead bodies, you know, deprived of their rights. But in Afghanistan situation right now, I certainly believe that there is a need for those people who are, you know, in dire need of food and need to stay alive, or, you know, maybe also medicines, because as I was mentioning earlier, COVID is no longer, you know, a priority in Afghanistan's current government. It's not serious. It's just like, you know, seems to be a fancy word that you can say to make yourself relevant to the world. So when we talk about all those challenges, like, you know, from schools, girls cannot go to schools. Imagine as the time passes, 1 year, 2 years, they stay behind. But we definitely need the humanitarian cooperation and aid from the world, but there has to be a mechanism to ensure, to provide the aid for Afghans is not going to have any kind of attachment that there is a recognition for the government or the state. So it has to be two separate concepts, and it has to be very clear. If it's not going to be clear, then it can, you know, create further crisis within the country. But if, I think even for Taliban, who are right now responsible towards all Afghans, because they are monopolizing all the power inside Afghanistan, their priority is that they are accountable towards Afghan people's lives. So to feed them, to ensure that, you know, we are not going to have this humanitarian crisis, that the world is concerned about it. So the first group who should be concerned about this is Taliban themselves, because they are the one who are in control of the country. But we need this sense of understanding and communication, along with the fact that they have to understand that, you know, if any state need to be recognized in the world, what are the criteria for that state? So the people should not be turning in Afghanistan as a hostage for political demands of different groups, where they will suffer, and their suffering, or the decrease of their suffering, will be based on some political gain of any given group. So this is something that is important, and the world must pay attention to that, whether it is the humanitarian aids for food or evacuation. Because if many of Afghans who do not want to be in Afghanistan, it is also regarded to come under the definition of humanitarian aid. They need to get out of that situation because they feel so insecure. There are people who feel that, you know, every moment is the end of their life. That can be even psychological crisis, a trauma, but at the same time, the reality on the ground shows that, you know, the security is not good in Afghanistan. So these are the things that can be defined under the package of humanitarian aid, I believe. because imagine like many women inside the country, they feel that they are no longer related to their identity and to their country, and they feel fear of what they have been doing so far in the country. Like, you know, maybe they were women's rights activists, maybe they raised voice and they were so bold. And even if they cannot be bold now, they have fear of their past. Think about the people who wants to continue working and being bold to do something better for the people. So these are the kind of issues that are very much confusing and interrelated to each other. But I think this is why the global cooperation matters, because on a very high level stage, there has to be a solution for this. And there has to be consensus that if the consensus doesn't exist, then it can be misused and the humanitarian aids can be stopped and people can suffer further. But I'm afraid I don't have any proper answer. For me, there are different demands. As you mentioned from the beginning that, you know, I'm a political person. For me, the political identity and the political inclusivity is very, very essential. But I know as a political person, one of my main job of me and many other politicians are that we have to care about the life and the well-being of our people. So that's why humanitarian aid must be the priority of everyone's work.
Yes, I think we can definitely agree more than anything to the point that we need more constructive mechanisms globally in delivering humanitarian aid to the countries and places where there has been political turmoil, where individual states, like how Mr. Kanders mentioned, cannot afford to directly manage a bilateral or multilateral agreements in terms of helping. So in this case, we are relying more upon the UN system and in other international systems, which I believe we must enforce even more stronger and more effectively in the forums. Thank you so much, Ms. Naderi. So I think we have Mrs. Sarah O'Dwyer who would like to ask a question. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. And it's a kind of along the same lines, and it's the difficulty, the impossibility about thinking and imagining what kind, you know, how can you get some kind of mechanism in place, you know? So I really, it's very, very difficult. But one of the things that keeps coming up for me is it's the UN, it's the whole idea of the responsibility to protect. Now, I know it's used only in cases of genocide and all of that, but I just wonder if, you know, that whole idea for any government is the responsibility to protect their people. I don't know if something could be done along those lines from the UN. You know, I don't know. It just came to me now, but it is all so extremely difficult, and the trying to imagine. It's basically imagine ideas, you know, think up how can you go about getting a mechanism in place, you know. Then there's also the part of, I see, you know, like where the civil society, ordinary people from around the world, how you can, you know, if there are ways that you can help, which is not directly through government. I think that's maybe something as well that's worthwhile thinking more about before everything is forgotten, you know, because that's the danger.
Yes, thank you so much, Mrs. Sarah, for the question. Just to mention to our participants who are not well aware of the responsibility to protect doctrine, which Mrs. Sarah just mentioned, it is more of it has 3 pillars, where each pillar means more like each stage of trying to have a global humanitarian intervention in countries where there are crises. So the third and the last option is where the UN sanctions and intervention of states in a country, and they go in using both military and non-military measures. So it's up to how the UN Security Council decides. So otherwise, the responsibility to protect has other pillars, which, for example, states also invite invite other countries help. So for example, if Afghan government wants to invite European Union's help or USA's help or other countries help, even India or China whatsoever. So that's how this goes. So maybe I would leave this as an open question for both of you to answer. How do you see the UN system, as she mentioned, in this whole process, which includes the responsibility to protect? I can also add this other question, which is also on the same lines, which we have on the chat, which says that, so it's from Mr. Dor. He mentions that I have a question about the United Nations. The permanent members can vote against or veto basically anything, which he mentions about the Security Council. That makes it difficult for the UN to intervene effectively in crisis situations. Do you agree, and what do you agree, and what do you think could be done about making it more easier for the UN to take action, which is basically, I think, the sad situation when it comes to the Security Council. So for the right responsibility protect to be implemented, we need the UNSC to pass the agreement, and if it doesn't, then there's a problem where the veto plays a role. So your thoughts on this role of United Nations, and especially the Security Council in such situations of crisis? Mr. Kanders, would you like to go first?
In this case, I can give a very clear and fast answer. Yes, it is a problem. But what do we want the United Nations to be? Should it be something like a world police? In my opinion, it cannot be this point. Because we have very different values, like here in Europe, or when I look to Russia or to China, and very different interests in the situations. And at least the smallest, most common value should be humanitarian rights, and this should lead the decisions in the United Nations. But even humanitarian rights can be seen very different when I have a look to some other countries. And I think Mr. Dor is asking these questions because there are often one or two countries who can give this veto, and they do out of other interests than humanitarian rights. It is an open question, as you said, because if we would want to improve the situation, then every state in the United Nations would have to agree on this common values. And this common values could be then the decision-making point, for example, even to go with military actions for peace enforcement into a country, to give after this peace enforcement humanitarian aid. But it's just a quick thought of mine now, and I hope there will be a way, but I don't think there is a way at the moment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kanders. Ms. Naderi?
I think this is what we have right now, UN. And first of all, the traditional or the usual mechanism that the UN has, as Mr. Kanders mentioned, there are some very conflicting issues that are values that it makes the process, very slow. But I don't know whether Afghanistan is going to be right now is a unique case to the UN, or they had similar cases in the past. When I say a unique case, my point is for 20 years we had more than 40 countries within Afghanistan or within our country, and they have been fighting along with Afghan soldiers, and not only fighting. They helped the development of democracy within Afghanistan. So when we talk about democracy, to us, democracy means the empowerment of Afghan people. But for the empowerment of Afghan people, in terms of the systems, in terms of the institution, in terms of the raising the awareness, the budget came from outside. We didn't have that budget. So the achievements that we're talking about today, it is a joint achievements, regardless of the fact that even the challenges that we have been talking about is a joint challenges, meaning Afghan plus international community, they are, taking that as the ownership of that challenges as well as the achievements that we had. But now the way the country is left, the regime all of a sudden collapsed, and a group that so far has been in the blacklist of Security Council, while they are declaring or announcing government, have they, has the UN or have the UN institutions faced similar problems in the past or not? If they face similar situation in the past, what was the kind of solution that they provided? And maybe those solutions can be more developed based on the lesson learned and the experience that they gained so far. It can be used in Afghanistan. The other answer is that they didn't have such a kind of unique case such as Afghanistan to face. So if that is the case, it is still brings an obligation to the UN to, because UN is composed of different governments, and the governments are accountable for the lives of their citizens. And even Afghanistan right now is without a government, what is going to happen to the human rights of these people? The way Mr. Kanders mentioned that humanitarian rights of the people, the humanitarian rights in Afghanistan is taking the attention. So if it's not, I personally believe that this is the biggest challenge in front of the UN, and they have to find a solution. Because if we are going to face more humanitarian catastrophes in Afghanistan, then it will undermine the existence of UN totally. I personally believe if the crisis gets worse than this, UN would lose its existence. I'm not saying that UN has been a perfect institution. It has been, criticized by different parts of the world, different countries, different institutions, as well as governments. But this is the kind of institution that we have so far in this world. And that's the only hope, that when we talk about human rights, human values, and all those beautiful wordings that is in the conventions, in the charters that the UN is attached to, that is all being subject to big questions. It's not only Afghanistan, it's about the main value of human rights, whether globally it has any longer values to any countries, or if that common values are going to be out of the table, then I don't believe that the UN would have any longer a voice to raise for. So maybe just like pandemic, just like COVID, it is something so new and novel, but they have to, there is no other choice, but we have to find solution for this. And if it's going to be detached from the governmental and the recognition or political side of it, good. Otherwise, I believe that, earlier it was also mentioned about civil societies. We need to find different ways to help the people. That's what we need right now.
Yes, that is a very pressing concern, that the welfare and the international assistance for the welfare of the Afghans should not be a negotiating term for getting political recognition for the government. As you say, it should be different. And beyond that, especially in the situation such as COVID, and it is so saddening to hear how unimportant the issue of COVID has become. However, there is COVID, there exists COVID everywhere, and especially when there is no measures and actions taken, the question is open to whatever is happening, and God knows what is happening should be the right statement of the situation when nobody's accounting to, or nobody's let to account to such situations. And I think we must. Yes, Ms. Naderi, I think you have something to say.
Thank you, Shruti. I just wanted to mention one more point. that I think this is the time that the region should take responsibility towards Afghanistan. Because if you see Afghanistan's relation with the region and the neighboring countries so far, there's still a relation. So this relation should have responsibility within that. It cannot just be like, an official and, based on some kind of good protocol of meetings. There has to be a main responsibility attached to this, because wherever is happening to Afghanistan, the next victim is going to be this region. So that's why I believe that our region should take responsibility regardless of the interest that they have in Afghanistan, because the situation and the crisis is so high that, everyone should think of what the priority is. Yes. Interest will continue and it can change as the time passes, but the level of crisis should not be undermined by them. So I hope that, our regional actors, or let's say, the countries close to our country, should also take more responsibilities in a way that, when they communicate, they ensure that there is going to be practice going correlally to the words, because this is what everyone needs to see, not good wordings, but the actions. And I think that can be done through different mechanisms.
Yes, Ms. Nareri, yes, indeed, the regional actors should take more role, especially countries like India, who already had a huge amount of investment in Afghanistan, and China, who is a great regional player, and Pakistan also has a great role, being such a neighboring country and who has such a huge amount of history in the relations with Afghanistan. So that is very important, as you mentioned. So I would like to now bring this session to an end by inviting both of you to give a short final word on your thoughts, where we can finish on how we can proceed further, or how do you see the situation to be much more better in progressive manner, especially for the sake of the COVID pandemic. So, Mr. Kanders, can we have your words, please?
One question back. You want my personal view out of the German view? Could you focus the question a little bit more where you are going?
I was just asking for your concluding statement. What would you like to say in conclusion for this discussion that we had?
Okay, it's a big task to make a conclusion out of this topics we've had, because we also had COVID. We had a little bit crisis management, but we had the actual big crises in Afghanistan and the actual situation. What today has shown to me, and I have to say, even if I'm normally the teacher, I'm very happy to talk with a lot of people in meetings like this, because in my academy we say, if you teach, you learn twice. And I also learned a lot today, which will I take with me. The most important point I've learned today again is that there are problems we can talk a lot about, think about, but cannot find a quick solution. And I hope that the states in the world will at least focus on the humanitarian rights, to have a common value, even for the United Nations, because I've seen Mr. Dorr has written again, decisions there are not always driven by these values. They are also driven by some countries by economics, by politics, just by keeping the power. And as Mr. Naderi said, this is the only institution we have. So my conclusion would be that we have a lot of work together in the whole world to have one institution which can help the citizens of states, even against the will of their governments. It's not the situation we have in Afghanistan now, but it's a possible situation. And we need such an organization which is strong and which is accepted by all member states in this way.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Kanders. Ms. Naderi.
I think what is really important at this stage is that regardless of official connection, even though UNAMA is already working in Afghanistan, so UN is involved and engaged in Afghanistan. But apart from that, I think all the UN agencies in different parts, the way Mr. Kanders mentioned, must be concerned about humanitarian rights. They have to be engaged with each other, meaning different states, as well as simultaneously, as well as with Afghan people. Because if there is going to be any solution provided to Afghan people, they must hear the voice of those Afghans. Those Afghans, even the ones who are not, writing or reading, they can sometimes prescribe a solution to their needs that maybe, a very well experienced technocrat may not be able to do that, or maybe a well-known politician may not be able to do that. And that's what I think we failed in that job, that we need to redefine it and we need to, compensate that back. So that's why I believe that there has to be connectivity and there has to be, different ways of being connected with Afghans and hearing them and asking them what kind of solution they want. Because the way I see it, I'm afraid to say that, Afghan people are feeling that they have been trapped. And the world, because they are maybe overwhelmed with so many crises, including the crisis in Afghanistan, and they cannot find a proper legal solutions, that by the time that the solution can be provided, there are going to be more crises coming and emerging. Because the people who feel trapped, we never know what will be happening next, because they feel isolated, they feel betrayed. They feel betrayed by different levels, by their own politicians, by their own government, by their partners, by their neighbors, by their regional partners to global partners. So this is something very important, that these people, for their humanitarian rights, they need to be still connected, that they can at least feel that their voice can be heard. And for any solution that can be taken for Afghanistan, Afghan voice are there, that it can give them the ownership. Similar problem Afghans faced during the government that they had, because the voice of Afghans were not that much important. It was like a group of people sitting around a table who dominated the table of power, and they were the one who were just, writing things and provided it to donor. And that's why there was a huge gap between Afghan government and the Afghan people. So now for any kind of solutions we want to provide back to Afghans, and to bring, as Mr. Kanders mentioned, bring the humanitarian right on the table, to bring the region, the neighbors, the global actors to the main values, is the way that they have to listen to Afghans and to respect Afghan people's ownership of the land, rather than to be more concerned with different, authoritative characters or people in power. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Naderi. Listening to both of you today has been so remindful of the world that we live in, and how situations are difficult, and and yet we still have the hope and the need to work in difficult situations. With your experiences and with what you shared, we can see how important it is in different places like Afghanistan and many more least developed countries and conflict countries. There needs to be more social security for people to enjoy the rights of accessing healthcare, accessing human rights, and accessing many more things that seem to be out of the question because of the conflict that they live in. So today in this event, we are so happy to take this from this discussion into the social forum, that we will be insisting on the importance of prioritizing conflict-based crisis management cares, where developed countries with much more expertise and much more stronger structures, even though there are many loopholes and situations, many advantages and disadvantages, like how Mr. Kanders mentioned today, we still need the international cooperation. So mentioning all that, we thank you both for giving us such a wonderful time, wonderful input into our discussions. And as Mr. Diego also from the Office of Human Rights just mentioned, that there is a program of action for least developed countries, including Afghanistan, which is going to be, which is currently under negotiation, and we will for sure be in contact in taking this forward in trying to provide our recommendations based on our interventions that we discussed today into this program, and hope that our discussions make some effort in bringing a better future. So thank you so much once again. And I thank all the participants who have taken part today. And we will share our event even much further to all our networks. And we're so happy that we made this event a very fruitful one. So thank you so much. And we wish you all a great time and a great time ahead at the Social Forum for ones who are taking part at the Social Forum. And we look forward to meeting you all again in different places. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Naderi. So Ms. Naderi and Mr. Kanders, I am just going to talk to Mr. Diego and the others and know much more about this program of action, which is being negotiated by the member states itself. So, and try to find ways where we can contribute. So, he's here.
Sorry, I made a question and I had to step out of the session as we're moderating the plenary from the room. Just a small word quickly before we go back to the panel. Thanks a lot for this brilliant and fantastic presentations. So the side event this afternoon, 6 p.m. Geneva time, will be actually addressing that point. It's a 10-year process. Every 10 years, the UN meets to make a plan to help the least developed countries, the poorest countries with on GDP per capita, less human assets in terms of education and health, more economic and environmental vulnerable. And so this plan of action is currently being negotiated. There's a second reading I could share later with Shruti and ask her to share with you the draft that is being prepared. And this week, states will continue negotiating that text, I believe, on Wednesday and Thursday. So it's really the right time to engage with this process. And countries like Afghanistan, the least developed countries that have gone through armed conflict or are still experiencing armed conflict, I believe that's an issue that it's very important to be addressed in the program of action. And many of the insights and discussions you had here today and recommendations you had here today could certainly feed into that process. So, and apologies, I didn't react at first. I was having to solve some technical issues, but I look forward to seeing some of you if possible this afternoon. And Shruti has my contact. I'll be happy to answer in more details in a further moment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Diego. So I will get the information from him as he mentioned, and I will share it with you all. So thank you so much once again. So we hope that we can move forward with something. Thank you.
Just for information, I'm sending on the chat now the link for the session this evening.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Okay. So if it's by 6 p.m., Ms. Naderi, it would be by 9 p.m. Tashkent time. So this event he mentioned about, it will be 9 p.m. Tashkent time. So that's the link he had shared, and it is we believe we can contribute a lot on our recommendations into that. If I can share this to you via WhatsApp as well. So if that's more easier.
It asks for password and
okay, I will check that, and I will get that to you as well. So we are
I'll show the password as well. I'll send by email everything. That's just the link.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. We'll see you soon. So happy to see that there is something that we can move forward and contribute forward. So he was a representative from the Office of Human Rights. So we are going to write a list of recommendations from our discussions today, and we will try to feed into that negotiation and let us hope for something more fruitful. And I will share it with both of you. I hope you like this experience, and thank you. I'm very thankful to have had you both.
Thank you.